Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. We're in the company of Christopher Dickey. Thank you for being with us. Thanks as well to Nico Ravado of Cartooning for Peace. Remind everyone what Cartooning for Peace is.
Cartooning for Peace was created by Plantu, cartoonist from Le Monde, and Kofi Annan when he was running the UN back in 2006 after the first cartoon crisis in Denmark. So, and there are about 150 cartoonists around the world in the association. All
right. Also with us, Ana Navarro Pedro of Portuguese weekly WIBAUX.
Right.
Welcome back. And France 24's Chief International Affairs Editor, Robert Parsons. It's been a week where we've wondered whether Iraqi lives matter. The death toll from a suicide attack just before the end of Ramadan in Baghdad, fast approaching 300. The target was Shias, but there were also Sunnis and Christians, men, women, and children. 292 was the death toll this Friday. That's way more than the 179 UK servicemen and women killed during the entire British campaign in Iraq. So the question, in the week where the Chilcot Inquiry finally released its 7 years of findings, does Tony Blair, Robert Parsons, does Tony Blair bear a measure of responsibility for the mess we see in Iraq today?
Well, I mean, of course he bears a measure of responsibility. He was the Prime Minister at the time. He's the man who made the decision to send British troops in there. You know, therefore, he bears a measure of responsibility. The question is it whether he was right or wrong to take the decision. It was interesting. He made a very spirited defence, in my opinion, after the Chilcot Inquiry's findings were made public. The criticisms made of him were stronger, perhaps, than most people even expected. That he was acting on flawed intelligence, that the legal basis was
many people thought this would be a little bit of a whitewash, and it wasn't.
No, it wasn't a whitewash at all. But Tony Blair responded by saying that, first of all, the inquiry does not say that I lied, that the information that there was no deceit, no attempt to fool the British public or to fool Parliament. The decision I took was based on what I thought was the best thing to do at the time. I was acting within time constraints at a time when my ally, the United States, had made it clear that it was basically a binary decision, that, to use his words, a binary decision that had to be taken in 2003. Either we go ahead with the invasion now or we don't, because the logistics of trying to repeat the operation at a later date, waiting to see whether Saddam Hussein would be in conformity with Resolution 1441 or not, would be too difficult to repeat. The political moment would be lost. He had to act quickly at that moment, and in his opinion, he made the right decision. I think, personally, that there is something to be said for what he was arguing. There are an awful lot of things, I think, mistakes and errors, bad intelligence, bad preparation, all those things. But at that moment, he was the man in the hotspot having to make a very quick and urgent decision.
Why so quick? Why so quick, Rob?
Because...
Why? Why? Because the Americans were saying you have to make it right away, right?
And he was the poodle precisely because of the logistics.
So how tell the dog to jump and he jumps?
A massive build-up of forces taking place.
I'm sorry, but I can't agree with you neither, because an ally, whatever, doesn't mean it was an ally, whatever or whatever. How you say?
Yeah, he was a whatever ally.
Yeah. However, ally. It does mean there is no thought and no reasoning in that. It's just blind following, blindly following the United States.
Robert Parsons, 1 year.
Secondly, I believe the Chilcot report does say in a soft way, but there was flawed information, wrong information, or assumption from which was based.
Tony Blair for that.
Well,
but even today, the intelligence.
But Rob, the most damning piece.
He was fed by the number one in MI6 information that gave him reason to think that Saddam Hussein was continuing to make preparations.
Yeah, but Rob,
that's what the
Chilcot report makes clear, and what we all knew who were covering it, I'm sure you knew it when you were covering it at the time, is that the Bush administration was determined to go to war with Saddam Hussein. The bottom line of the Chilcot report is it didn't have to, there was no need to go to war at that point because the diplomatic initiatives had not been exhausted.
This is the point I'm making, and it's the point that Tony Blair replied on. Yes, perhaps, but what was the alternative? What if we didn't
Well,
go
the
to war?
alternative would have been to save millions of lives, actually, and trillions of dollars.
That is a moot point.
Well, no, it's not
No,
a moot
by no
point. I think we
means.
know exactly how it turned out.
You're talking about Saddam Hussein. What would Saddam Hussein have done if you'd been given a white flag
There was
to go ahead to do with
it wasn't a
every
white
life?
flag,
What
Rob.
would have happened
It
to
was
the
the
Kurds?
most draconian. It was the most draconian inspection regime
He'd already
in history.
massacred Kurds in Hallujah.
It was the most.
He'd already used chemical
I know
weapons
exactly
against
what he
you.
did. I covered it all through the 80s, Rob. I know exactly what he did.
We shouldn't ignore it now.
I'm not ignoring it for a moment. The most draconian inspection regime in history was imposed on him. Wait, Rob.
Okay.
And in that inspection regime, no evidence was turned up of any of the casus belli that were being cited by the Bush administration or by Tony Blair, and you know that perfectly well.
But there was plenty of evidence that he was trying to get around the sanctions.
That he was trying to get around the sanctions before the inspection regime.
Yes, and take away the threat of immense force being used against him.
And
he
so,
would have felt he had
wait
carte
a
blanche.
minute. That's exactly the reasoning that got people like Hillary Clinton to vote for the war. Because the reasoning was, the argument was, we have to have the threat of force, or he won't bend. Well, okay, you have the threat of force, and he did bend. Precisely the problem for the Bush administration and for Tony Blair was that he did bend. He was bending. And when he bent, the excuse for war was going out the window. The reason the war happened when it happened was not because he failed to comply, but because he was complying, and the U.S. and the British were not turning up the information that they expected to turn up. They never turned up any information of weapons of mass destruction before the war. After the war, they didn't either.
I completely agree with you. There's no dispute about that. But the intelligence that Tony Blair was getting from his best intelligence people was that he has to act on his intelligence.
That is the public. That is the view.
It's easy for us to sit around the table here.
Rob, let's call it up. The most damning cable from that Chilcot report, from the, what is it? It's a document. It's 2.5 million words. The most damning cable. A year before the invasion, he tells George W. Bush, "I will be with you, whatever."
Exactly.
It's a very foolish thing for him to say.
Whatever. And besides, you just go into a war, you just kill people, you just have your own men and women killed, and you have no post-war plans?
I totally agree with you.
I mean,
it was an absolute idiocy to have not to have proper post-war
yeah, but you
plans.
say that it was in a hurry that they should go at that moment.
No, one assumes.
Absolutely
come on.
From the beginning.
That's not correct. The possibility of going to war over Iraq had been considered for a long time before that. There had been plenty of opportunity for people in the US and in the UK and anybody else who was going to be involved in that operation to have given sufficient thought to the post-war planning.
They did. You know what happened? They did. There was the Future of Iraq project. They called in all the experts from the State Department, the CIA, elsewhere, to plan what to do about Iraq. And do you know what the Bush administration did? They took all those people and they shunted them aside at the beginning of 2003. And they said, we don't need any of that. We don't want to hear any of that. And anybody who was involved in that project was excluded from the post-war Iraq.
Let me turn to the Frenchman in the room here, Nicolas Vadot, because France at the time was bashed as being weak because they had voted no at the Security Council alongside the likes of Russia and along others as well. What are your thoughts on this and how the fact that Tony Blair is still such a polarizing figure all these years later?
Well, I'm Fred, but I also have a British passport. But I thought that the French Chirac's presidency was awful in many respects, apart from one thing. He had the guts to say no to the Americans and to the British on the Iraq invasion because he taught from minute one that Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with the 9/11 attacks. And from minute one, after the 9/11 attacks, the Bush administration said that Saddam Hussein was responsible for that. And everybody knew that he wasn't responsible at all for that. So I think the French did a good job not going to war. against Iraq at that time. And I have a few cartoons to show you about Tony Blair, because Tony Blair's a really good client for us, because, you know, he has
We all remember the Steve Bell cartoons from The Guardian as a poodle.
And he has this sort of Joker-like grin on his face all the time. And I have this cartoon from Hajjaj, who's cartoonist from Jordan, and he's quite harsh on Tony Blair. If we can see the cartoon. And, you know, the more he apologizes, the more he smiles, the more we can see the blood on his teeth. So I think this one is very, very powerful. And there's also this one from Parish, from India. And everybody knows about the Pinocchio metaphor. And what's nice is that it's growing leaves, and the leaves are growing. The more he apologizes, the more the leaves are growing, and they're growing so much that they could end up being a bush. And you know, and when I lived in Australia, you know how we called John Howard, who was the Prime Minister? He was a very short guy, and we called him the bonsai, because a bonsai is a small bush. And
That's mean.
And the last one I have is one I did this week. No, this one I did this week. The tour was 250 at the time, but it's the irony of the news, because the Chilcot Inquiry arose at the time just after this massive killing terrorist attack in Iraq. So it shows the responsibility of Tony Blair and George Bush back in 2003.
We had a debate on this the other day, Rob, and we saw in front of our very eyes the Jeremy Corbyn wing of the Labour Party, defended by one panelist, versus the Tony Blair wing of the party, tear each other apart. And it's really torn the left apart in Britain.
Totally. I mean, I suppose it's probably the most damaging policy decision that Tony Blair could possibly have taken if taking into account the future of the Labour Party. Split it not just down the middle. Probably about 2/3 of the Labour Party were opposed to the decision to go to war. Tony Blair took the decision.
And in the House of Commons this week, David Cameron, when the report is issued, acknowledging the fact, first of all, that it was all of Parliament that voted for the decision, and secondly saying Britain mustn't withdraw from its place in the world. And those words ring loudly in view of what's happening.
Good job, David.
I mean, it's what everybody was saying before Britain voted on Brexit. You know, if Britain decides to go down that path, it's going to be afloat in the Atlantic with nobody paying very much attention to what it has to say. And unfortunately, that is the position that Britain now finds itself in.
But did the Iraq conflict sort of set a domino effect that's led to Brexit?
I don't see
it's
that.
an overstretch.
I think you could say that, and to some extent this is true in the United States, after a hugely interventionist period immediately after 9/11, where Britain and the United States were striking out all over the place in Afghanistan, Iraq, and all of those started to look very ugly by the middle of the decade. Then there was a reaction set in, for sure. A reaction set in. I think actually, ironically, although I think Blair went way too far with his whatever alliance, there is a problem now with Great Britain. I think it has become an unreliable ally for the United States and probably for NATO. I think this is the kind of thing they were discussing just now at the NATO summit. If you have a country where you have the prime minister telling you, we're going to be on board with you and go and take care of Assad in Syria in 2013 because of the chemical weapons, and then he turns around and puts it before Commons and they vote it down, and you go, too bad. Sorry, Obama, we're not going to join you on that one. If you have them now at a time of huge global instability, you suddenly have them unable to sell, staying in the European Union, and you throw all the cards up in the air again. Britain is no longer a reliable country.
Let's listen to Barack Obama this Friday at the NATO summit. He made no mention of the special relationship, instead praising the EU as Washington's privileged partner and drawing his own transatlantic lessons from the Brexit vote.
On both sides of the Atlantic, we have to address economic frustrations and anxieties of many of our people, feelings that undoubtedly contributed to the Brexit vote. Fears that they're being left behind by globalization and economic integration. Our governments, including the EU, cannot be remote institutions. They have to be responsive and move more quickly with minimal bureaucracy to deliver real economic progress in the lives of ordinary people.
Anna Navarro Pedro, with big elections coming up next year in France and Germany, what's the forecast listening to Barack Obama there?
And indeed, many people being left on the road by this new trend and in our economies. For the poor people who voted in England for the Brexit. Here in France, it's the people who feel neglected by state that are looking into extreme right wing. Germany. It will be at the crossroads next year, and everywhere in Europe there is this huge gap between elites, political, economical, almost cultural media elites, and the rest of the people. And what we need somehow, I believe, it's some more regulation, more politics in the good sense of it, of ensuring that we can all live together in our countries, in our societies. And I'm extremely upset about what's going to happen in the next 12 months here in this old continent, given that this wide gap and the incapacity of our politicians to see it and to see the reasons for it.
All right, and as the pound, meanwhile, tumbles in a week that saw a run on commercial property funds in London, the Conservative Party going deliberately about the business of picking David Cameron's successor. The finalists are the Home Secretary Theresa May, who voted Remain, and Energy Minister Andrea Leadsom, who campaigned to leave the EU. We won't know the winner until early September. Leadsom, for her part, promising what sounds like a promise to make Britain great again.
When we come to see the post-EU figures, I expect to see continued growth. I expect to see people buying goods, going about their normal business, buying their homes, and yes, enjoying a pay rise.
Nicolas Vado, it's all good.
What a session.
And you know, I live in
And
Brussels.
a chicken in every pot.
I live in Brussels, and I know many Brits in Brussels, and they're all devastated, and they're all trying to claim citizenships from their spouse, from could be Belgian, Irish, French, whatever, because they really can't understand what's going on in the UK. And what strikes me is what Barack Obama said, because he made the same sort of statement a month ago about the Brexit thing, and nobody listened to him, and apparently nobody listens to him anymore here. And Britain had the choice. They could be a strong ally within the EU or a weak ally of the US, and I don't know what they chose.
A weak, unreliable ally.
Brexit has come in waves, it seems, at the ballot box and on the pitch. Sunday is the final of Euro 2016. Neither England nor, surprising, Wales will be there. Now, when the tournament began, Christopher Dickey, here present, admitted he's not big on football. Now, if there's one man who can convince you, then surely it's Gomundur Benediktsson.
Gekk Danny Rose og Jói sem setur hún á Gylfa. Gylfi í fyrsta Jóntaði og Kolbeinn. Kolbeinn með skot! Já! Við erum komnir yfir!
That was after goal against England, by the way. So what do you think of soccer now?
Well, you know, I watched I didn't watch much of it, but I did watch the last half of the Iceland-France game, and I loved it. I thought it was really exciting. I thought Iceland looked terrific. I was proud of the French team, and I really enjoyed it. And then I watched the game last night as well. And I thought it was terrific. And
Could have watched only the second half as well last night.
Yeah, but then, you know, I don't know. Against Portugal, I don't know how interesting that's going to be. I mean...
Yes, it's starting already.
It's starting already, and people with mixed loyalties. There's so many French citizens.
So many French.
There's three players for Portugal born in France.
Yes, and there is one player for France, the famous Griezmann, Grisou, as people are saying, trying to remember Zizou, Zidane. Griezmann, his mother is Portuguese. His Portuguese grandfather was a soccer player in Portugal.
So there would be an own goal if he scores for France. Then.
Yeah.
So he's even considering having, you know, some sort of display remembering his grandfather on Sunday.
All right, football does reflect a national psyche. And we should just mention this. France broke a tournament duck against Germany that dated back to a cruel 1982 World Cup with its semi-final win in Marseille on Thursday. But fair play to the defending world champions, the Germany of today, with its multicultural faces on the field and its aesthetic passing strategy has seduced football fans the world over, including the French and including the Guardian's Barney Ronay, who said to an older generation, Germany's inability to produce those ragged, ugly, deeply West German kind of players who could rabbit punch a game away in the clinches has been notable.
That's quite a compliment.
I see you nodding vigorously.
I can show you a cartoon from Faro that was published in France Football, I think. And I have to translate it because it says that the French team gets their vengeance after 82. And Didier Deschamps says to the player, Schumacher, does it ring a bell? And they say, hey, coach, who do you think we are? We love Formula One races too, because they don't know who Harold Schumacher is, of course. It's the goalkeeper who sent Patrick Battiston to hospital. I remember I was 11 at the time at the semi-final in 82 in Sevilla, and I cried all night, I think. So it was wonderful to see them win last night in a decent, regular way. Now they could go on and maybe beat Portugal once again.
There is another record to be beaten as well, because Portugal actually, I believe since 1984, since it lost to France, has been kind of hinged by this defeat and never managed to get over it. France got over
10 in a row. But it has to end sometime, and it has to end for us,
but not
unfortunately.
as many as France in front of Germany, so there is hope for us.
All right. Well, best of luck, Anna Navarro Pedro.
Best of luck for the French as well.
Best of luck, Robert Parsons. I don't know who you'll be rooting for. And Christopher Dickey, who no doubt will catch every minute of it.
Every minute.
Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to Emma James. We're still piecing together what's happened in Dallas on Thursday evening.
Yes, it really is quite incredible in the very literal sense of the word. When I picked up my mobile phone when I woke up this morning, I looked in disbelief at the news alert, because when I went to bed, people were protesting peacefully. And I've been trawling through, obviously, the Twitter messages, the tributes, and it really is very moving. This particular tweet came from the Dallas Police Association. We just lost another one officer down. It really is very hard to look at, and it does seem like it's been relentless for weeks now. Just one terrible news story after another. This image, I thought, was particularly strong. The officers saluting the fallen as they were brought into the hospital. The Dallas Morning News has been doing an absolutely stellar job of covering this tragedy. This was the image that was on their front page. At that point, there were only 4 dead. Obviously, we now know that it is 5. They say that this is an officer being comforted. It looks like he's doing as much comforting as he's receiving. But that image for me really sums up the sort of the double tragedy of this. These were people out on the streets trying to protect protesters and make sure that the protest passed off peacefully and that nobody was hurt. And they are the people who have been targeted. Now, this is how it all started out. Smiles, tweets from the Dallas police. Lots of messages talking about what it was that the demonstrators wanted to say. And also saying here, police officers maintain traffic control to ensure the safety of the demonstrators. And as Vox reports, Dallas police were doing everything right, and then the shooting started. They say until sniper fire rang out from nearby rooftops, the protest itself seemed to be a model of goodwill between both police and protesters. Not everyone, though, getting things right. The New York Post has created a front page that has created quite a storm. This is the image. You can see that there are 2 fallen police officers on the floor. But what has really caused the most upset is that headline, Civil War. That has really caused shock and reverberations, certainly on the internet.
Rupert
Yes.
Murdoch's paper?
New York Post. Lots of reactions to this one. That night, none of us could sleep because the world was burning, and the New York Post decided to pour gasoline on the flames. This Twitter user says, "It may be what you want, but you're not going to get it. You're wrong. We are better than that." Now, another person who's fueled a great deal of controversy today is Joe Walsh, a former Republican congressman, just the one term in Illinois, now a radio host. He describes himself as the new voice of freedom. He tweeted earlier today that this is now war. Watch out, Obama. Watch out, Black Lives Matter. Punks, real America is coming after you. Now, he then deleted it, but of course not before people could actually grab images of that tweet. Some people even reporting him to the FBI and the Secret Service because of that believed threat to President Obama. He later tried to defend and clarify his stance, saying he wasn't calling for violence. But I think this Twitter user